It is indeed a privilege to have with us on this very solemn day for Pakistan, the President of AzadJammu&Kashmir. I call it a solemn day because after following a policy of appeasement for 28 years after the Simla Agreement, when we changed the map to reflect different Kashmir, we have now gone back to the original place where we consider Kashmir as our own territory. I will not delay the speech that the AzadJammu&Kashmir President will give. Over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for waiting because I was delayed. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was at the AzadJammu&Kashmir Assembly, and therefore the session got delayed, and that's why I have showed up late, for which I apologize to Mr. Ikram Sehgal, also members of the board, Karachi Council on Foreign Relations, and other participants. Now, let me go straight to the point. As a matter of fact, as you would recall that last year on August the 5th, India invaded and reoccupied the territory. It also beefed up the presence of its troops in the occupied territory. Before August the 5th last year, the number of troops used to be 700,000, but then it was increased to 900,000 troops. And the sole purpose of this force was to brutalize the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Immediately after attacking and laying siege to the entire territory of Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian occupation forces started a series of crackdowns all over the occupied territory, and they especially targeted young men. Another thing that they did in the months of August and September last year was to incarcerate thousands of boys and children. As a matter of fact, the number was 13,000, and this was reported by Indian Federation of Women. Now, this is a solid, reliable, and credible figure, and they were moved into concentration camps or jails, and there they were indoctrinated and tortured. So this was another step that they took. In October, or to be precise, October the 31st and November the 1st last year, the BJP RSS regime divided the occupied territory into two parts and called them union territories. As you know, that India calls its federation union, the Indian Union. So they declared them, these Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir, as union territories or municipalities or federal territories or federally administered territories. This was all done without the consent of the people because the assembly had been dissolved. This so-called assembly had been dissolved a year earlier, and other steps that they took were without the consent of the people. So Kashmir was turned into a colony, and what Kashmiris were witnessing was foreign occupation, alien domination. They were under foreign occupation and alien domination, and India was now an occupation force, which it was before August the 1st, but now formally, in accordance with international law, it's an occupation force there. Then early this year, what they have done is that they introduced these new domicile rules, and they are meant to redesign and change the demographic composition of the occupied territory for all times to come. You know, the population of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir is more or less 14 million, which would be 1 crore and 40 lakhs people, roughly. And they tried to change this composition by drafting and implementing these laws, which are akin to the Nuremberg laws of 1935 of last year. These laws qualify the members of the armed forces who've lived and served in the occupied territory, or civil servants who have been associated with banks or statutory bodies, or other public sector entities. All these people and their families have been given these domicile certificates, and migrant workers who'd come from India, or the sanitation workers, or the so-called West Pakistan refugees. So we're talking about, in one go, 500,000 people in the last 2 months. And they have put this kind of demographic change on a fast track, because these outsiders who are applying from India or from abroad, their applications are processed expeditiously by the officials, and if an official is not efficient enough, then he's fined rupees 50,000 Indian rupees. So, whereas on the other hand, these original inhabitants, native Kashmiris, especially Muslims, are being denied these rights. You would recall that last year, India had repealed Article 370 and also 35A. 35A recognized 4 established rights of the Kashmiris, and they were permanent residence, acquisition of property, privileges in regard to education and livelihoods, or public sector jobs. All these rights are taken away from the Kashmiris, the original inhabitants, and now they are being given to these Hindus who are being imported from all over India. And bus loads of these new residents of Kashmir are being transported to the occupied territory. Now, these actions are crimes against humanity, or war crimes, in accordance with the 4th Geneva Convention, or ICC Statute, or Additional Protocol 1, or several UN Security Council resolutions. In addition to that, I mean, these occupation forces have been killing young men every day in cordon and search and cordon and destroy operations. And they have been fetishizing women, and they have been harassing them. They have been using sexual violence against women as an instrument of war to silence the Kashmiri activists, and also to impose a collective punishment on the entire population. In addition to that, the Indian occupation authorities have been violating the ceasefire line, or the line of control, and they have made life hell for the people of Azad Kashmir on their side as well. Now, the Indian leaders, Narendra Modi, the defense minister, the interior minister, and Amit Shah, who is the president, not Amit Shah, but Mohan Bhagwat, who is the president of Russia Swayamsevak Sangh, they have also been threatening to take back Azad Kashmir militarily, attack Azad Kashmir, and take it back militarily. So I think that if you would recall that Rajnath Singh in the same breath had threatened China that it would take back Aksai Chin. And that's why you had this very sharp reaction from China. The Indian leaders, Narendra Modi and Rajnath Singh, I think that they've been threatening to disintegrate Pakistan, and they have indicated that in this vicious adventure, they might use nuclear weapons. So the situation has been dismal and dark in the occupied territory in this past year. And what is happening now, or what would happen in the coming months, or this will have dire consequences, because I'm talking to multiple audiences and I'm warning them that if we do not act now, it would be too late to rectify the situation. Because if India changes the situation on the ground through democratic changes, there's little that we will be able to do. Because then the Muslim majority state, which wanted to join Pakistan, would be turned into a Hindu majority state. And this is possible because by the end of this year, they would have imported 4 to 5 million people on a fast track basis. And if they do not accomplish this goal in 1 year, I'm sure that they would be able to achieve it in 2 years' time. So that's the only window that we have. Let me also tell you about the international reaction. You know, the international reaction last year, during the months of August, September, and October was very strong, and there was a groundswell of support for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and a groundswell of opprobrium for India. India's crimes against humanity and the brutalization of the people of Jammu and Kashmir had been called out by the leading international media, television networks, social media, also world parliaments. Many parliamentarians spoke up and spoke against Indian actions, and the international civil society was on our side. Of course, a handful of countries also supported us formally, like China and Malaysia and Turkey and Iran and some West European countries, particularly Nordic countries. But the most powerful governments in the West, particularly these veto-wielding powers, they remain tongue-tied and tight-lipped on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, and that has been a barrier for us. That's not all. Last year in October, our attention was distracted internally because of the Azadi March. People were confused, which Azadi are we talking about, the Azadi of the Kashmiris or the Azadi of the people of Pakistan? And that distracted our attention. And the world's attention was also distracted because of Brexit, because of impeachment proceedings against President Trump, and finally, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, under the cover of this pandemic, while the world was focused on fighting and beating this virus, India wanted to remove the issue of Jammu and Kashmir from the global agenda. Therefore, we here in Azad Kashmir in Pakistan and our friends abroad started a series of webinars, these virtual conferences, so that we could keep the issue alive with the parliamentarians, with the diaspora community leaders, and with the intellectuals and academics. And we have succeeded to some extent. During this period between April and now August, Kashmir has been discussed widely and extensively. But I would frankly say that we do not have the kind of traction and attention that we had last year. And this remains a challenge. So we have two challenges, or two or three challenges. Let me enumerate them. First is how to take our international movement against India's actions to a critical point where we can persuade the rest of the international community to put pressure on India to stop killings in Kashmir, because massacres, systematic massacres are taking place. What is happening in Kashmir is genocide and ethnic cleansing and war crimes. Now, Genocide Watch in the United States has said that Kashmir is about to enter the 9th stage of genocide. They have given 10 stages, and the 9 stages of extermination of the entire population. This is precisely what is happening in Kashmir right now as we speak, as we mark the first anniversary of August the 5th developments last year. So this is challenge one. Second is, how can we stop? How can we mobilize international community to stop land grab in the occupied territory? And how can we stop these Hindu residents, which are being transferred from all over India to the occupied territory, from stealing the jobs and livelihoods and businesses and educational rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir? Because there must be a sense of urgency. And then, of course, we have this ongoing struggle to turn our international awareness campaign to an international movement like the one which happened in South Africa, or relating to South Africa, the anti-apartheid movement, or the anti-Vietnam War movement. That is the challenge that we have, and we have a strategy. And I'm grateful to the Karachi Council on Foreign Relations. These are my introductory remarks. If there are any questions, I'd gladly respond to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's been a very detailed speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful to the Karachi Council on Foreign Relations for inviting me to speak to you today. The security environment in South Asia is challenging and it is changing. The dominance of the region by a global power, the United States, and by a regional power, India, is diminishing. The United States has eroded its influence through mistaken foreign interventions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. And India, in South Asia, is embarked on a project of hate which is eroding the stability of the subcontinent and of India itself. The project of the BJP and its parent, the RSS, is a project of hate, a hate that is directed against the Muslims of the subcontinent, against Pakistan in particular, and the Kashmiris specifically. The RSS draws its inspiration and its organization from the fascist parties of Germany and Italy of the past century. The project they are embarked upon is to impose a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu state, on all of India, and to eliminate the legacy of Islam in the subcontinent. The intervention and imposition that was embarked upon on the 5th of August last year is the initial part of this plan. It is significant that the Indian government has described this plan as, quote, the final solution, unquote, for Kashmir, unashamed of its historical context in the elimination of the Jews in Germany by the Nazis. This genocidal plan is being imposed systematically. 900,000 troops have been inducted in Kashmir, the densest occupation in the world. A 24-hour curfew has been imposed. All political prisoners, or all political leaders are in prisons. Thousands of youth have been abducted. Extrajudicial killings are being perpetrated. Collective punishments being meted out to Kashmiris, and even young children under the age of 4 and 5 have been subjected to pellet guns which have blinded them. Journalists have been accused of terrorism. This genocidal plan and the actions of the Indian government in Kashmir has been well recorded by the United Nations, by civil society, by non-governmental organizations, and is well known. These actions are also illegal. These atrocities contravene international humanitarian law, international human rights law, including the 4th Geneva Convention. They also contravene the Security Council resolutions, which have stated that the final disposition of the state of Jammu and Kashmir will be determined by its people through a free and fair plebiscite held under UN auspices. The United Nations Security Council has declared that all such unilateral actions taken by any party to the dispute will be null and void. Therefore, the Indian actions inside Kashmir, despite their brutality, do not change the disputed status of Jammu and Kashmir, its status as an international dispute that has to be resolved through implementation of the Security Council resolutions.
I'm going to request Dr. Huma Baqai to please give her speech.
You see, as the valley bleeds, and it's been 1 year since last 5th August, all of us bleed with the valley. And it's not about a few thousand people. It is about 8 million people kept under a complete lockdown. We're talking about 8 million people who are under a virtual communication lockdown and of one of the most militarized regions in the world. It is also now being called the largest open air prison in the world. This is the ground reality of the valley today. And as much as India would like to paint it as a real estate issue or a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, the valley is much more. It is about human rights violations and it is about international law violations. But perhaps even more important is the fact that the peace in South Asia is hostage to the Kashmir issue. And not just that, all the efforts that the international community are taking to initiate the peace process in Afghanistan and achieve peace on the ground in Afghanistan is also hostage to the situation between India and Pakistan, because there is no confusion about the fact that India has extended the theater of war to the western border and uses that border to destabilize Pakistan. And in fact, you see, if you hear their talk shows and some of the seminars that they are having, they actually talk about destabilizing Balochistan. They talk about destabilizing Karachi, and they give the most atrocious ways through which it could be done, where they actually talk about giving money to political parties, giving money to other entities to create unrest. So the theater of war is expanded to Afghanistan. It is used, the land is used against Pakistan, and all of this is hostage to the mindset in India that whatever is happening in Kashmir is perhaps, or how they would want the world to see, is that it is instigated by Pakistan. It is not instigated by Pakistan. It is a fenced border, something we allowed to happen in Musharraf's era. And what is happening in Kashmir is indigenous, is entirely indigenous. And that makes it even more difficult for India to defend what is now happening in Kashmir as of right now. Because if you remember, when the 5th August lockdown was imposed, we would hear timelines like the situation would be okay in 72 hours, and then they said it's going to be okay in 2 weeks' time, and this continued for a while, and now it's been a year, and all global rights organizations have raised red flags about how the situation is on the ground. But perhaps what I want to put on the table here today in this August gathering is that Pakistan and the international community must understand that they need to move beyond showing reservations and concerns or calling for hollow mediation between Pakistan and India, because the issue is much larger than that. They need to show some teeth. They need to put some tangible measures there, perhaps even sanctions. The Europe is now talking about sanctions against Israel to curtail and contain the Modi government. You know, Arundhati Rai, and I think the Modi government is also in serious trouble. And the serious trouble is that I'm going to quote what Arundhati Rai says about Kashmir, especially the present situation. She categorically says that the Kashmiris do not need liberation from India. It's India that needs liberation from Kashmir. So that is the kind of close ally that India has pushed itself into. What is allowing India to sustain this is the changing geopolitical situation in the region, which is of course what we are now referring to as the new Cold War. And in this new Cold War, the extra regional alliances that India has entered into or the facilitator that India has become for extra-regional powers to do the containment of China in this particular part of the world has allowed India to carry on, and the international community or the corridors of power where they choose to turn the other way about what is happening in Kashmir, and not just in Kashmir, what is happening across India in terms of treatment of minorities. And it is not just about the treatment of minorities. I think the social fabric of the so-called one of the largest democracies of the world is torn. Indian constitutionalism is under threat, Indian secularism is under threat, and Indian democracy is crumbling under the strains of the Hindutva. What should Pakistan do? I think Pakistan has exercised a lot of strategic restraint so far. In the year 2020, up till now, over 1,700 violations of the line of control have happened, and we have not once used excessive force. We have used diplomatic channels. We continue to invoke elements of strategic restraint, soft power, and diplomatic construct to counter India. We continue to be a state which exercise what I call defensive realism. But at the same time, how can the international community forget that perhaps this border is called the second most dangerous border in the world? And how much provocation can Pakistan take? And until when will Pakistan not be pushed and provoked to a point where it becomes a hot war? And it suits India. We've exercised this restraint because we also realize that it suits India because it will be another diversion from the Kashmir issue, and it will turn it into a bilateral issue. So I'm very, very pro exercising strategic restraint and defensive realism. I heard parts of what Sardar Masood said, and we said perhaps we should go offensive. My thing on the table, or my vote, is for continuing with defensive realism, giving the right kind of messages to India where it knows that there are red lines that it cannot cross, and responding and not reacting. What happened in Ladakh could have been much more severe, and China could have chosen to inflict a lot more damage on India than it chose to. The disengagement is not complete. However, the message is loud and clear. And the message is that there are Chinese red lines that India cannot cross. And the truth of the matter is that there are Pakistani red lines that India cannot cross. But at the same time, the solidarity that Pakistan has with the Kashmiri people propel us towards a more proactive stance. And there is something that Ikram Sehgal Saab actually carried a banner in the last seminar that we had, and it said, Kashmiri lives matter. And yes, Kashmiri lives matter, because what is happening in Kashmir right now is nothing less of genocide. When I speak to those people, there are around 12 young deaths every day. And when I say 12 young deaths, it means that around 12 people every day are tortured to death. The age ranges from between 9 years to 15 years, or 9 years and 27 years. They do not release dead bodies, because if they release dead bodies, there will be funerals, which will instigate more support and will sort of strengthen the Hurriyat. And then they broadcast the screams and of the people who are tortured on loudspeakers. People who are released are made to sign affidavits that they will not talk to the press. Amnesty International, BBC, and various other organizations have raised red flags about how journalists and free independent media is not allowed to go to India. Even Indian independent media is not allowed to go to the Kashmir Valley, and the journalists that go there are treated under the terrorist laws. Some of them are even picked up, interrogated, threatened, asked to leave, and of course most of them are just not allowed to go there. So what they're essentially doing in Kashmir, which is extremely dangerous, which is that it is not just genocide, they are eliminating leadership, and they've done it successively. In the first year, older people, the old school of leadership was house arrested, and their communication with the people was disrupted. The second phase was when the Kashmiri Intifada took roots, they attacked and eliminated and shot dead completely people like Burhan Wani and others. So that the second tier of leadership, which was very active and tech-savvy, was eliminated. And now they are eliminating the prospective leadership, which means that boys as young as 9 years to 14 years are picked up and either sent out of Kashmir or held in concentration camps. I think it's a horrendous situation. And I'm also going to once again ask the international community to look into it, because Pakistan has been highlighting these issues and perhaps we can highlight them more. But you know, what have they just done and they do this under a garb. They create this fog. So they've created this fog around the Kashmir issue, and they sell all kind of stories to the international community. In the same way, they've created this fog around and use the COVID-19s for the political ends, to achieving political ends. So it's not just that in Kashmir, the changing of demographic law was introduced, but across India, in the name of shortening the curricula, in the name of shortening the teaching workload, they have eliminated chapters on secularism, pluralism, democracy, relations with the other countries. So all those chapters that may touch upon anything which may question what the Modi Sarkar is doing are being eliminated from the curricula. I think these are very, very dangerous trends. And these trends need to be addressed, highlighted, and curtailed. And the valley bleeds. We stand with them, but there is a lot more that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you for helping us out, Huma. I am going to request General Shakeel. I would like to introduce General Shakeel. General Shakeel, after being a soldier and a good life as a soldier, he's been a diplomatic, also been our High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, where he did a remarkable job. I have a personal relationship with him. His father used to be my company commander. Most of what I am today is because of his father, both as my company commander first, and then as my commanding officer, and I was his adjutant. So I owe a lot to his father, and I must recognize that before I hand over to General Shakeel. Over to you, General Shakeel.
Sir, thank you very much. I am so grateful for your remembrance of my father. It touches me deeply, sir. Thank you so much. I'll quickly get to the subject. Since last year, the environments have changed and drastically changed and will continue to remain in flux. The opportunities today must be therefore exploited. India's neighbors are clearly expressing their dissatisfaction with Big Brother. Earlier, they could not say so. India-China relations are at their lowest. BJP's policies are harming the very structure of the state. Their media establishment relationship, the relationship of media and establishment, are beginning to fail in hiding the real face of India. So these are the opportunities we're developing there. Coming militarily, the days of conventional wars are over, with which we all are accustomed and want to see in those lights, but those days are gone. And it's now morphed into a hybrid war. This is a more expensive, dangerous, invisible and sinister war that we have entered. And most of you who don't see anything happening, don't see it because this is the nature of war that we have come into. Coming to Pakistan, there's a lot of pressure on the government to display some visible, conventional, unconventional activities from our side to show our resolution to standing with the Kashmiris. Any such effort will put the Kashmir issue in the background. This is not a good option. This is not an option today. Today we must concentrate on the people of IOK, the occupied Kashmir. That's our weak link. To keep their hope alive and deeply touch them through other means, for which some measures are in place, but we need a definite upscaling and visibility of what we do to do this a little more, a little later. I'll tell you. We are in a consistent war with India. There is a need to strengthen our state structure, which is now beginning to take the brunt of this war instead of the kinetic structure that we have. some policy improvements, and also tell our people that there are no quick decisions coming without a very sound basis on which we start our efforts today to reach to some place. So any decisions that the people by and large are expecting are far too away. Luckily, what is on our side, the entire spectrum of leadership, government, opposition, etc., stands united on Kashmir issue. That's our strength. We need to have an ambassador at large for Kashmir as it is in Afghanistan. It will facilitate the Foreign Office. They're doing a lot of job. They have tremendous pressure. They need to be assisted and not criticized alone. In all important capital, embassies must have Kashmir cell. This thing has been repeated many times, but these are definite structural changes that must be done if you want to achieve results. Coming within Pakistan, areas within Pakistan that are critical to Kashmir's political battle must be given greater representation and attention. I leave this point here. Assembly of AJK can be turned bicameral. Its name can slightly be altered to include Gilgit-Baltistan. The senators from Gilgit-Baltistan and even diaspora of IAK can be given representation in bicameral assembly, that is in the Senate. And once we take some operations inside IOK, their demography must be respected. I can say no more on this issue also. Coming to IOK, diaspora of IOK must be supported and organized internationally for providing them forums. Some actions are visible also. IOK students who are studying abroad can be given some type of financial support, not very exhaustive sums, but just to tell them we are there. Legal community to launch cases in international courts against human rights violations in IOK being done in garb of draconian laws that they have. We could also think of some financial support within IOK to touch the common masses. It can be done selectively, but the word will go around. We have to touch the common man. It is an expensive proportion. It's very difficult to get to the right people, but it is very important in these times to touch the common man so that they remain alive to our support to them. We are fast losing it. The time has to be used. The most important thing, narrative. It has to be reversed. We don't have to spend now on an armored division. We must spend that kind of money on our narrative. But being a soldier, I may say something which people may not like. No narrative works without an armored division backing it also. So we need to reverse our armored division and continue to maintain our force structure to give that due credibility. How to reverse this narrative? There are so many things can be taught, can be said, being tried. Just one small little indicator. The stationing of forces of India in Pakistan were allowed temporarily by the UN resolution. These forces allowed in AJK and IOK were both temporary, and therefore their rights are different from normal forces who are deployed in a country. Now the Indian temporarily employed forces are conducting human rights violations. It is open to being taken to international court. Legal advisors there, they talked enough on it, and there are so many other things that one can bring to the fore to take Indians to the courts, to international court, and third party can also take them to court. The IOK people can be taken out and taken to the court. So much can be done on this and has been talked about. Let me say, if we give them space, the resistance within we give them space, the resistance inside IOK will get more solid footing, and the resistance has eventually to come from within. It has eventually come from within, and people of AJK and Gilgit-Baltistan historically have fought, and they've been fighting for years. They can do it well on their own ground. The next issue is we must use this opportunity to enhance our relation with the neighbors of India. It's a compulsion of these countries, these neighbors of India, to better their relations with China in comparison with India. This is a reality. It is unfolding. And what will be its military effect? This struggle will eventually result in enhanced deployment of Indian Army on the borders of each of these countries. We have a role to play that, and we should ensure that this happens, and we can do it, and this has happened before also. Thus, the full might of Indian Army, which always is brought on its western front, will be curtailed. To this end, it's time to employ special envoys to these countries so that they can closely exploit available opportunities and have more meaningful relation with these countries. So that's an opportunity we must use, and it means a lot of work, and it means we must share our work through our special envoys for the Foreign Office. All possible options of hybrid war have today to be exploited with equal intensity and balance, particularly those which our eastern neighbor is already providing us. Instead of using an approach which will be counterproductive, we should use the space being given to us by our adversary, and is giving us huge spaces. We have to continue to divide their available military effort against us. We have to exhaust this military effort they have. And this is a long-drawn battle, gentlemen. And with this, we have to continue giving support and sacrifice at our end with and without visibility for Kashmir cause. We also need to meet our adversary at all platforms with a changed tenor, a little more aggressive from what we think we are. We have to upscale that too also. Gentlemen, this war will finally be lost within India because of their efforts. Thank you very much. Sir, thank you.
Thank you, General Shakeel. I may just like to add that General Shakeel was too successful as Director General Anti-Narcotics Force, and therefore he retired because he's carried too many people or too many politicians with drug connections, or too many politicians' connections who had drug this thing. So he was retired early, and therefore it is dangerous in Pakistan to be too successful in catching people accountability. Now, with that, I'm going to turn over to another consummate diplomat, a person whom I hold in the highest esteem. I have had many years knowing him, first in Nepal when he was ambassador there, and then of course for many years in Switzerland, where I was hosting various presidents and prime ministers of various regimes over the times, and he was the ambassador at that time. There was a person from PPP who was prime minister, Yusuf Zagani. I was his host. Nawaz Sharif was there, I was his host. And then of course, Shahid Khan Abbasi. So I think I spent a lot of time with Ambassador Munir Akram and saw him at close range. And I have the greatest respect for him. And I always said that, there's a quality that you see in our diplomatic corps is best symbolized by people like Ambassador Zamir Akram. Without further ado, I hand over to Ambassador Zamir Akram.
Thank you, Ikram Sehgal Sahab, first of all, for those very kind words that you have spoken about me. And secondly, for inviting me to participate in this very important webinar on this question of Kashmir, which marks 1 year of the lockdown imposed by India in the occupied valley. The previous speakers, Dr. Baqai and General Shakeel, have covered a lot of ground, and I will try and avoid repeating those areas that they have already covered. So let me, first of all, characterize in my view, the outcome or the consequences of what India has been doing in Indian occupied Kashmir and what it actually amounts to. And I think that it is not just in terms of violations of human rights or humanitarian crises, but first and foremost, I think that their actions have led or are creating conditions for ethnic cleansing, because in addition to the revocation of Article 370, they have also revoked the citizenship rules and laws relating to Indian occupied Kashmir, whereby non-Kashmiris can acquire Kashmiri citizenship or Kashmiri rights to buy Kashmiri property. This is the most insidious means of trying to overtake or undermine the Muslim majority of occupied Kashmir by inducing people from the rest of India to come into occupied Kashmir, buy property, gain citizenship, and in the end, there is the objective, in the end, leading towards turning the Muslim majority in Kashmir into a minority. This would be something that the Americans did to the Native Americans. This is something that the Israeli governments are trying to do in occupied Palestine. And this is a playbook. The Israeli playbook is something that which Mr. Modi is implementing in Indian occupied Kashmir. So the first thing is ethnic cleansing. The second is the level and manner in which the Indian army, 900,000 people, who have been in force in this occupied valley, particularly in the Jammu region, particularly in the Jhelum region, sorry, ever since 1990, when the Kashmiri uprising started. These troops, paramilitary forces, the military, have engaged in a systematic imposition of genocide. What they have been doing in terms as a result of the arms control, as a result of the Armed Forces Act and other legal means that have been given to them, the legal cover that has been given to them, has been the deliberate violation of human rights, using rape as a means of, as an instrument of policy, of killing innocent people in so-called encounters, in prisons, in which can be called as extrajudicial killings. These, taken together, violate the Genocide Convention. And this is something that we need to highlight in the international community. Then the third, because of this genocide, the Indian forces have been guilty of war crimes. This kind of treatment of prisoners, the kind of treatment of people taken into custody, even those that are demonstrating on the streets, including children who have been tied to vehicles, military vehicles, and dragged around the streets, where shotguns are used in close proximity, in close range, to shoot at people in their face, to destroy their eyesight, including for children and women and children. These all amount to war crimes. And this is something, again, that the Indian state is guilty of in Kashmir. And then there is, in my view, state-sponsored terrorism against the Kashmiris. We talk a lot about terrorism against states, but not by states against individuals or against a community. And that is precisely what the Indian government has been doing for years in occupied Kashmir. It has unleashed its state terrorism through its agents that are in the pay of the Indian government. The so-called Sarkari militants, as they are called, are no one else than paid, hired assassins of the Indian government that have gone around killing innocent people. And Dr. Baqai talked about the assassinations and killings of the leaderships and in the past and continuing. These were the people who were doing this. You remember the incident of Chhattis Singh Pura when Sikhs were massacred on the eve of Bill Clinton's visit to India. This was a deliberate terrorist attack to put the blame on the Kashmiri struggle, to demonize the Kashmiri struggle and to implicate Pakistan in such a heinous terrorist act. Later, it has been proved to have been a terrorist attack that was carried out at the behest of the Indian state. So these are the clear-cut issues on which we need to hold India accountable. And we need to take them and hold them accountable in international fora, such as the International Court of Justice, such as the International Criminal Court, the Human Rights Council, the Council of Europe, the European Union, as well as other parliaments across the world. And this is something that Pakistan has done, and because the Kashmiri diaspora is also is engaged in, but this needs to be done in a much more organized and a much more sustained and concentrated effort along the 4 issues that I have identified. Now, what has India gained from this? I think that Prime Minister Modi has actually shot himself in both his feet. His policy in Kashmir has backfired, and this is obviously very clear now, 1 year after the lockdown. For one thing, there is total alienation among the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Even those like Sheikh Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti and the others, Ghulam Nabi Azad, and those who were pro-Indian at one point of time, had to be imprisoned because their loyalty could not be counted on anymore by the Indian state. And so the alienation of the Kashmiri is complete. It's not just the leaders of the Hurriyat, but it's the leadership across the board. And you could be hard-pressed to find any Kashmiri today who can speak in favor of India and Indian rule in Kashmir. So that's the first thing that's happened. The second thing that's happened is that despite the use of excessive force and violence, repression, the Indian state has failed to intimidate the Kashmiri people because their struggle has grown. It has not diminished, and it has become widespread. And so that is why they have had to increase the number of their troops inside Indian occupied Kashmir. So this is another factor which points to the failure of Mr. Modi's policy. Third, it has brought international focus on the issue of Kashmir. Nothing that Pakistan could have done would have worked as well as India's own mistakes in Kashmir, which have brought about this international focus on what is happening in the occupied valley. Indians, as we saw in February of last year, were also unable to intimidate Pakistan. After the attack in Pulwama, the Indians crossed the border and bombed places in Balakot in Pakistan. Pakistan responded in kind, and then the Indians discovered that Pakistan was determined to take the necessary steps to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. It was then that the Indians started to de-escalate. So they have learned a lesson that if they are trying to bring about a new normal by which any development in Kashmir can lead the Indians to attack anywhere along the border or the ceasefire line or the line of control, then there will be a definite Pakistani response. And so this has been a sobering effect, has had a sobering effect, despite the propaganda that Mr. Modi used, but this has been a sobering effect on the Indians. Then again, the Indians have been taught a very clear lesson by the Chinese in Ladakh in the recent crisis. What has happened as a result of the confrontation with the Chinese is that now India is confronted virtually from Jammu along the line of control all the way up to the Karakoram Pass near Siachen and onwards along the line of actual control with China throughout Aksai Chin in Ladakh. This arc puts Indian occupied Kashmir into a three-tiered encirclement. The only tier is the southern tier, where the Indians are present and can supply through to their mainland. But along this entire region, this line of control to line of actual control, the Indians are facing a front that is with both Pakistan and with China. And that is the worst case scenario for the Indians when they have talked about fighting a two-front or two-and-a-half-front war, because the half of that front is, of course, the Kashmiri uprising. And as we discovered, because of the de-escalation that has taken place by India with Pakistan and with China, it demonstrates that India is not ready and not capable of fighting this so-called two-and-a-half-front wars. And finally, on this issue, today there are not 3 parties to the Kashmir dispute. It's not just Kashmiris, Pakistan and India, but now there are 4 parties, and the 4th party is China. And it is because of that that China has twice taken the Kashmir issue to the UN Security Council, and it has rejected the Indian revocation of Article 370 and the imposition of and the division of Kashmir into federally administered territories of Kashmir and Ladakh. So the Chinese are now a clear party to this problem, and that is a development that cannot and does not work in India's favor. And to conclude, let me say a few words about dialogue, because there is a lot that is said in Pakistan, and the Prime Minister yesterday also mentioned that there is no other solution but dialogue to end the Kashmir dispute, which is true, because war is not an option between 2 or 3 nuclear powers that are in the game at this time. But at the same time, we have to be realistic. There can be no dialogue with Mr. Modi. He is a Hindu fascist whose agenda is very different from trying to find solutions to problems with neighbors. In fact, he is adding to those problems. So as long as Mr. Modi is around, there is no question of any dialogue, and we should not be repeating and asking for this kind of dialogue. I think that also realistically, in the present environment of the new Cold War, there is no possibility of any kind of mediation that can help to resolve the Kashmir problem. I do not see any meaningful mediation from the United States, because the United States sees India as an ally against China, and it is not going to undermine its interests with India in order to offer its mediation. Although Mr. Trump has talked about mediation, but I think this is only for optics. It is not a really serious offer. In any case, his offer is conditioned on the fact that if the Indians also agree, and he knows the Indians will never agree. So the mediation option for now is, I think, not a realistic option. We need to continue to highlight the Kashmir issue and the Kashmir struggle. We need to emphasize that this is a struggle that is legitimate. It is endorsed and condoned by the United Nations Charter, as well as United Nations resolutions, which recognize the right of people under foreign occupation and alien domination to wage a war for their freedom and self-determination. That is how this struggle needs to be projected. And the narrative of terrorism that has unfortunately been cast on it needs to be overcome. On the contrary, we should make every effort to project the Indian use of terrorism, not just in Kashmir, but also against Pakistan. Dr. Baqai mentioned this as well, that the incidents that took place recently in Karachi and the stock exchange attack, the attack on the Chinese consulate, these by the so-called Baloch Liberation Army. Who are the paymasters of the Baloch Liberation Army? There's no secret, because the Indian National Security Advisor, Mr. Duwal, has stated publicly that he is willing and is engaged in supporting this kind of terrorism through separatist groups and elements. So this is the kind of track that we need to follow internationally by projecting the reality of this issue. And final word and this is my personal view, I do not speak for any official organization or anything, but I think that the most important thing is that the Kashmiri struggle for self-determination needs to continue, and by that I mean that struggle through the force of arms. This struggle is the most important struggle in order to keep the Kashmir issue alive. If the Kashmir struggle dies down for some reason, God forbid, then the Indians would have felt that they can get away with what they are doing. As long as the Kashmiri people continue to struggle, both politically and militarily, that hope for freedom will remain, and it will be the ultimate reason, the eventual factor that will convince the government of India in the future to find a solution to this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Zamir Akram. Very grateful for your very absolutely elaborate and lucid account of what's happening and what we should do. I have now a pleasure and privilege of introducing Barrister Anwar Mansoor Khan. Mr. Anwar Mansoor Khan has been the former Attorney General of Pakistan. He is not an unknown figure, and because in many cases, both inside the country and outside the country, he has successfully pleaded Pakistan's case. And I think it was only right that we should see not the Kashmir dispute, not only from the holistic point of view, but also from the point of view of the legal ramifications. And therefore, I request Anwar Mansoor Sahab.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today, a very important day in relation to Kashmir. The manner in which Kashmir got its unfortunate issue in India as to how it has been made a union of India and how things have proceeded. But before I go into that, it is important for me to tell you as to what is the true issue behind the whole problem that India thinks it is facing. Everyone recalls the famous resolution of the United Nations Security Council. That is the resolution number 47 of 1948. This resolution was a very crucial resolution. Not only was it crucial, but there was a meaning behind this resolution. I would only read a few lines of this resolution because it is very important that we understand how and why this resolution was brought about. It says, having considered the complaint of the government of India, that is, the government of India actually complained against Pakistan after or during the war with India. And what it was, India's concern, the dispute over the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And having heard the representative of India, and in support of that complaint and the reply of Pakistan, there were certain very important aspects that were brought about. The most important thing that was brought about was the restoration of peace in Kashmir. And it was then that the United Nations Security Council required the government of India to do numerous things. I will only read one of them, And it says, when the Indian forces have been reduced to the minimum strength in A above, arrange the consultation with the Commission for stationing the remaining forces to be carried out in accordance with the following principles: that the presence of troops should not afford any intimidation or appearance of intimidation to the inhabitants of the state. That a small number as possible should be retained in the forward area, that any reserve of troops which may be included in the total strength should be located within their present base area. That is, the Indian Army was required to be moved out of Kashmir. And not only was it required to move out of Kashmir, but it was required to keep away from the locals, namely the Kashmiris. Now, this is a very, very crucial aspect. Probably very few know that there have been 21 different resolutions in relation to Kashmir. Naturally, all of them reflecting a plebiscite to be carried out. All of them requiring the persons, namely the Kashmiris, to be protected as, in accordance with the international laws, they are protected persons. Now, why do I say that? There is a very crucial document that is usually not brought about or even referred to, is the fourth convention, that is usually known as the Geneva Convention, wherein the relative to the protection of civilian persons in the time of war was required to be maintained. Now, in this, a very important aspect was brought about, and that was Article 3 of this convention said that in case of an armed conflict, not of an international character, occurring in the territory of one of the high contracting parties, each party to the conflict shall be bound to apply as a minimum the following proposition: persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including the members of the armed forces who have laid down their arms and placed the hors de combat by sickness, wound, detention, or other causes, shall in circumstances be treated humanly, without any adverse distinction, founded on race, color, religion, or faith, sex, birth, or wealth, or any other similar criteria. This further went on to name what we call the protected person. And it says a person protected by this convention are those who are given moment and in any manner whatsoever find themselves in a case of conflict and occupation. Now, India has actually occupied Kashmir, and that is why we call it an Indian occupied Kashmir. Now, it is also important to note that under Article 32 of this very convention, the high contracting parties specially agree with each of them is prohibited from taking any measures of such character as to cause the physical suffering or extermination of protected persons in their hand. This prohibition applies not only to murder, torture, corporal punishment, mutilation, and medical or scientific experiments not necessitated by medical treatment of protected persons, but also to any measure, and this is important, to any other measure of brutality, whether applied by civilian or by military agents. Now, keeping this in mind, in the occupied area, the United Nations, the Charter of the United Nations, I would refer to various provisions which are very important. Chapter 7 of the Charter, Article 39 onwards, very clearly requires the Security Council to take appropriate action. And I'll read. The Security Council should determine the existence of any threat to peace, breach of peace, or act of aggression, and shall make recommendations to decide what measures shall be taken in account in accordance with Article 41 and 42. Then Article 40 says, in order to prevent an aggravation in the situation, the Security Council may, before making recommendations or deciding upon the measures provided for in Article 39, call upon the parties concerned to comply with such provisions, measures as it deems necessary or desirable. And then 41 and 42 require that should the Security Council consider that measures provided in Article 41 should be inadequate or have proved to be inadequate, it may take such action by air, sea, or land forces as may be necessary to maintain or restore international peace and security. Such action may include demonstrations, blockades, and other operations by air, sea, or land of members of the United Nations. Now, what is the situation all about? The situation today is that India, in violation of every resolution there, every resolution means the resolution 47 of 1948, resolution number 91 and 96 of 1951, resolution 98 of 1952, resolutions 122, 123, and 126 of 1957, resolution 209, 2010, 211, 214, and 15 of 1965, and finally resolutions 303 and 307 of 1971. All these resolutions require that plebiscite be carried out and that those protected persons should there be protected against all inhuman actions. That is, Kashmir was a disputed territory and continues to be a disputed territory. Kashmir was occupied, and that is why the resolution 47 of 1948 came about, and it was on India's request and complaint. Once it was on India's request and complaint, naturally they were bound to follow every part of that resolution and subsequent resolutions. They were required to protect, and instead, India has mounted over 600,000 military personnel, police, and other armed personnel in Kashmir. The most important part is that they were required to remove all armed personnel from Kashmir, which they did not. They were required to create an atmosphere where the plebiscite could be arranged. They were bound not to change the character of Kashmir, which they are in the process of doing. They made Kashmir and Jammu unions of the state of India, that means forcibly annexing Kashmir, which the resolutions categorically bar them from doing. Unfortunately, the Security Council chooses not to act under its own charter. The charter being, which I just read, 39, 40, 41, and 42 of Chapter 7, which categorically requires that where there is a breach of peace, they will interfere and intervene. And if such a situation comes about, where by such simple intervention, they are unable to resolve the issue, then they can, by air, sea, or land, use force to stop any action which is contrary to international law. It is upon Pakistan and the government of Pakistan to proceed and cause the Security Council to take appropriate action, an action taken in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions and its charter. And in not doing so, we probably are not pushing enough. I may add here that no doubt the government of Pakistan, especially the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has gone into, and probably the first time when the Kashmir issue was raised in the National Assembly, National Assembly of the United Nations. And it was very forcibly done, but no resolution, no action, unfortunately, seems to have been taken. Let me go further on this. The Human Rights Commission is required to act, and they are required to act under the Geneva Convention again. The United Nations Human Rights Watch has again not said anything which we need to proceed with. The law is apparent, the law is sufficient, and we can go and proceed. At least try to convince the people, the members of the United Nations, to proceed in accordance with the mandate of the United Nations Charter. Now, keeping this in view, I would say that the United Nations has been given sufficient notice. The United Nations took up the matter, but without resolving the issue, they concluded. I would here say that we need to move very strongly and move the various member states individually so that a resolution against India could be brought about in the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Anwar Mansoor Sahab. Obviously, a very, very detailed view about the legal ramifications, and we are very grateful to you. Only you could have really done this in such great detail, and we really that's it. Now, before I introduce the next guest, who has just joined us actually from leading a rally, actually he was being very instrumental in organizing the business community throughout Karachi, and with the result that this rally, which started in the Clifton area, was also addressed by the governor, and Haji Rafiq Pardesi is coming directly from there. He was not present when the President AzadJammu&Kashmir said very kind words about him, because he also invited him to lead a business delegation to Kashmir. And Haji Rafiq Pardesi is a well-known business figure, an industrial figure in Pakistan, has been for many years abroad, and now come back to Pakistan and is really, really investing in Pakistan in a great way. So I have, please, in the meantime, I would request Haji Sahib to please go ahead and speak.
Today, we had a very good rally in Karachi, and the governor of Sindh was present there also. Thousands of people were there also. Alhamdulillah, lots of people from the business community, from universities, from different parts of the community, they were present there. And everybody has given a very good speeches and messages to the world that now something has to do for Kashmir. Lots of time we have passed just for nothing. 1 year has passed. The people are suffering. Already 1 year has lost. Now the future is winter. And in Kashmir, the winter is very bad. So I don't know what is going to be happening in Kashmir now. If you don't wake up, if you don't do anything, if you don't support them, how can they will survive? Is a big question mark for me. But at least all over the world, everybody from the world, every human being should support this cause. And inshallah ta'ala, we will support from Pakistan side, from Karachi side. Pakistanis are ready to support at any stage now. I have discussed with about Kashmir matter with lots of people, and everybody is saying that Haji Sahib, we are ready to support you. Wherever you want to go, you just do it. Just tell me what we have to do. Anwar Masood and our team has made a very good petition just to submit in United Nations. Very soon we are going there with your support, with your advice. And inshallah, we will see that this United Nations people, we have to wake them up, let them go to India and discuss all these matters with these people, or whatever legally they have to do, we will force them to do it. The second step, we will just go to OIC and we will tell them that this OIC made for Muslim Ummah, for the problems of Muslim, for the benefit of the Muslim. So what these people they are doing since 1 year, lots of problem in Kashmir, lots of problem for the humanity. There are not only Muslims are there. I think 68–70% Muslims are there, but rest are Sikhs are there, Hindus are there. Everybody is suffering. So how can people survive in this world? If these things will be happen in everywhere in the world, then there will be no law, no humanity, no peace. How can the people will live? In whatever this Modi or his government or his some RSS people they are doing with the humanity is very bad. They are creating a new dates or something new which has not happened in the last many years in this world. So either they have to take some proper decision, or either the world has to change these people. If these people will not be changed and these things will be go on, carry on like this, I think it will be a big problem for India also, this Indian people also, Indian community also, because they are in all over the world. So people they don't like now. We just take the example of New York just yesterday. They have accepted the logo of Kashmir, but they didn't accept to do anything about Ram Mandir, what they are going next to Babri Masjid. So these are the signs that people are not accepting them now. So if these things will be run, one day it will be a big problem or a big disaster for whole India. And India is our neighbor also, so it's a big disaster for them. Definitely we will get some bad things also here also. So now the time has come, everybody should wake up. Just tell India, just tell Ms. Modi that this is not the right way what you are doing. Please correct yourself. Bring some human beings over there. So these people, they just focus on the right way, right things, and the things will move very, very positive. In India, everybody knows that a big community of Muslims over there. They are giving big problems for them also. So once they will succeed in Kashmir, the second step is India. Third step is the neighboring countries. So please, everybody should do something now. Start to do something now. If we will not do anything, the day is coming that we will see all over the world big problems, big disasters. And unfortunately, both India and Pakistan are atomic powers now. So if the things go beyond the limit, then who's responsible? So please, my request to all my brothers, my sisters, all my colleagues, my members, please, we have to do something. We are human beings. We have to look for the humanity, and then we have to look for our Muslim brothers also. Inshallah, we are working day and night, and we will do all the work day and night. I am committed to this cause, and I will not stop. My team will not stop. We will do work day and night to solve this problem, inshallah, very soon. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you very much for inviting the President of Azad Kashmir. Inshallah, very soon we will come with our team, with our members, and we will come and meet you, and we will discuss in detail what the way forward will be for the Kashmir cause, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your very kind words and your address on this webinar. I would like to ask you certain questions on behalf of the members of the Board of Governors. The first is that the Prime Minister of Pakistan was in Muzaffarabad addressing the Legislative Assembly. What were the majority of his remarks that he intended to take in the next few months or years or whatever?
Of course, he talked about the map, which was released yesterday. And he said that this map reflected the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir and of the people of Pakistan. And he said that India had made that move last year, and there had to be a counter move. And this was Pakistan's counter move. But still, Pakistan has said that this map, or the delineation on this map, is subject to a decision by the United Nations Security Council. We are still bound by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. So he was differentiating between India's occupation and our adherence to the rule of law, to the international rule of law. Second, his message to the Kashmiris was that he and his government and the people of Pakistan and the people of Azad Kashmir would stand behind them, would cross any frontier to defend them. He also said that there is no need for despondency or hopelessness, that this is a great nation, the nation of Pakistan. It has a great potential and it is on the right path. He also gave the examples of Ghazwa Badr, for instance, or the Prophet's leadership, or the model of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his leadership, that how we should follow that model and we would succeed. And he said, don't be overawed or frightened by the so-called power of India, because it might well disintegrate. I mean, the whole edifice of fascism, this Hindutva, this doctrine based on hatred or incitement to hatred, that this might crumble. So this was his message, and he said that Pakistan has this potential and the ingenuity to overcome this challenge. Then he also said that India would be taken down, or this RSS BJP regime would be taken down because of its hubris. He says that hubris creates many blind spots, and Kashmir is one blind spot that India has created. So these are some of the messages. His message was of hope and solidarity with the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and a message to the international community that if you do not intercede, the situation might deteriorate and it would have dire consequences, not just for South Asia, but for the entire world.
Dr. Azim Akbar, who's a member of our Board of Governors, has mentioned what you have also mentioned about the engineered democratic changes in occupied Kashmir. Now, he has asked that this may affect a plebiscite if it does take place in the future. What steps do you think Pakistan should take in this regard?
I personally believe that India was not sincere about a plebiscite in 1948 or 49. In fact, I mean, when the issue was being debated in the United Nations Security Council at that time, they'd already drafted Article 370 and they had persuaded Sheikh Abdullah to endorse accession to India. So, and later on in the early 50s, you would recall that the Constituent Assembly was formed, and that assembly, in fact, authorized Kashmiris joining the Indian Union. I would also like to highlight that India had already written in its constitution in Article 1 that the territory of Jammu and Kashmir was part of the Indian Union. So India was never sincere about holding a plebiscite. It has been coming up with different pretexts and excuses, but all were fake and fallacious. So India is trying to change the demographic composition of the territory, not to facilitate plebiscite in the future, which suits India. It doesn't want plebiscite at all. What it is trying to do is that it is making UN resolutions and plebiscite redundant and irrelevant. And this would be the consequence of the steps that India is taking. Now, Mr. Sehgal, your question is, what would Pakistan do? I think that, you know, as I said in my opening remarks, that unless we take the whole movement through communication, through political and diplomatic means, through very proactive diplomacy all around the world, the whole Kashmir movement, to the critical point, the United Nations would not respond. The United Nations would not stop these crimes, the United Nations Security Council, nor would the international community. And that's why, I mean, it's a big challenge. It is not something that would be resolved in closed chambers. Now it has to be made an international movement, and the issue of Jammu and Kashmir should be resolved through pressure which would be built in squares and highways, so that the world sees that the world citizenry is with the people of Jammu and Kashmir and with the people of Pakistan.
I have a question from Air Marshal Masood, and you know, he is of Kashmiri origin. And he has asked that, and of course, taking advantage of the fact that you've been a consummate diplomat, he says foreign policy which is not derived from national interests will never work effectively. That is a universal truth. Why have we never formulated ours in writing?
Why haven't we? I missed the last part.
Formulated foreign policy derived from national interests in writing.
You know, any nation's foreign policy is aggregation of the interests of its people. And our rulers, our successive governments have been trying to do that year after year. Foreign policy, as you know, changes from time to time, from decade to decade. I mean, we saw the Cold War period, we saw our alliance with the United States, we saw the crumbling of that alliance. We also became most ally at one time with the United States. And then you would recall that in Afghanistan, we became partners once again. And since 9/11, we've been collaborating in one form and the other with the Western countries led by the United States. Now, I think that, I mean, all the rulers, all the governments have had their perceptions about what the interests of the people are, and they've been trying to formulate foreign policy in accordance with their perception of those interests. But I think that hidden behind the question of Air Marshal Masood is another question that in the changing circumstances, what kind of foreign policy we should have, what kind of contours it should have. And I would say that these are the suggested contours as far as I'm concerned, that make Pakistan a strong nation. This should be our mission statement. And then state that we have the resources to do so. And I believe strongly that we have the resources to do so. And the third is that we have to invest in the political will, because in this regard, we should not dither. We should not vacillate. We should invest our political will in achieving the first objective, making Pakistan a great nation. And if that is the objective, we would be serving the interests of the people and people of Pakistan. And I would say that it would have, broadly speaking, 4 or 5 dimensions. One is national security, which subsumes first-rate defense capability. The second is that we should have political agility, so that we can increase the number of our friends all over the world and decrease the number of foes and enemies. The third is that Pakistan should become an economically strong country. And the last but not the least is that we should try to forge unity. And I would say that forging unity or ensuring national security, these are not automatic processes. You have to craft these things. When you are practicing statecraft as a leader, you have to craft these things. And I think that if we go down this path, keeping in mind these 4 dimensions, we would be serving the interests of the people of Pakistan.
Now, I think both the president's speech, which you will get to see in a couple of hours, and the question and answers that the questions that were posed to him and the answers that he gave, and each of the speakers really went to great lengths and explained the position that we are in as far as Kashmir is concerned, the position this region is concerned, the dangers that we face, and the necessary steps that we must take. I think the crux of the problem is, and I do take into account Dr. Huma Baqai saying that have strategic restraint, right? But at the same time, I think the consensus is to have offensive diplomacy, not engaging into conflict, but at least, like General Shakeel said, that we can, talk to them, but we must make sure that while we talk to them, they must feel that there is strength behind what we talk to them. Otherwise, the Indians are never going to listen to us. That has been proved over 28 years, not only 28 years, but over 38 years, and also really right back to 1947. So I think whereas the right route to go is to engage and talk to each other, but the doors have been shut to us, and the red lines that we've been talking about have been crossed so often, and so many red lines have been crossed that it has left us with very few options in the meantime. So first of all, let me thank each speaker, starting with the President of AzadJammu&Kashmir. He spoke very well, very fluently, with conviction. And then each of the speakers, which included, Dr. Huma Baqai and Ambassador Zamir Akram, and in fact, Minister Anwar Mansoor, and also in the end, Haji, Rafiq, Pardesi. And yes, we are going to take up the notation by the President of AzadJammu&Kashmir, and we will see as businessmen and industrialists what measures we can take to strengthen Kashmir economically, because it is only through strengthening them economic means that we will give them the wherewithal to at least stand up on their feet in a better way than is being done now all throughout Kashmir. So thank you very much. I'm very grateful to all the participants. I'm very grateful to all those from the Americas who have woken up early in the morning from Asia, East Asia, which at the moment now coming to late evening. So thank you all very much. And with that, I call this webinar to a close. Thank you all.